Welcome back, everybody, to Too Much Popcorn, the movie review podcast where Jimmy and I sit down, watch a movie with our eyeballs, and then talk about it with our mouths. We talk about the highs, the lows, the things we liked, the things we probably didn't like, and then ultimately our opinion on whether you should watch the movie or not. And this week, we watched the hit 2008 film, Speed Racer.
Hit, universally panned Speed Racer.
Cult classic hit, Speed Racer.
I think I was browsing IMDb for a quick second, and it looked like the meta score of it was it was in the red.
Oh, no.
Possibly a 34.
Oh,
I was like,
no.
oh, come on, folks. What do you... red? What's that? What does that even mean? It's like a chance of a wildfire, very high.
I see a review like that, and I feel like Trixie, where I just go, oh.
You feel like you've been the victim of some sort of Speed Racer misogyny.
Oh, yes. And who hasn't been a victim of Speed Racer's misogyny?
I mean, it was a long-running series. He could have done it every episode, and we'll never know.
True. But luckily, there was none of that in this movie. Well,
Just a
actually,
teensy
hold
bit.
on, yeah.
There was a teensy bit. But guess what? There was also a lot to love about this movie. And I think we're going to spend the rest of this time just talking about what worked, what didn't work. Runtime-wise, there was never a point where I was upset about how long it was, but there was a point where I go, wait, there's still 30 minutes left in this movie?
Yeah.
I was like, how? Actively how? I was a little concerned. But it pulled it off. So we watched this film. I think it's the Wachowskis. So this is like hot off the heels of some Matrix shenanigans too, I think. Did the trilogy come out like 2001, 2002, 2003, and then... were there year breaks in between any of them?
I want to say the last one was 2006. Don't quote me on that, but I do think there were...
I think you're right, though. I think there was a bit of a break between them.
Yeah.
I think you're right. And so if this was 2008, then yeah, you're seeing like post-Matrix, here's what the Wachowskis are doing. They're making a Speed Racer movie.
Yeah. And, you know, I don't know, like, any of the history of the Wachowskis or, like, why they decided to make this movie, but they did.
They did. And they made the hell out of this movie.
Yeah.
You can tell almost immediately that there is a respect for anime, for the type of storytelling that anime is capable of doing, that a sort of Western media generally will stay away from. And it makes the film almost unwatchable at times because of how far it leans into an anime, not aesthetic, because it never really looks like anime, but because of how they're trying to interweave these story beats. The way that they stitched this film together is very anime. I don't know if there's any other way I can say it.
No, I think that's a good point. And I think that's kind of what I was feeling the entire time we were watching this movie, is that there was kind of like this uncanny valley to the whole movie, where normally you have the uncanny valley, which relates to like human faces or the human image. But this was like an uncanny valley of like, hey, it's not classical storytelling, and it's not even like anime storytelling, and it's not like an anime style. It has its own style that like flowed in between each one of them without properly touching each one.
Right.
And it almost just like kept throwing my brain off in the weirdest of ways.
I agree. It was an uncanny valley of reality where there wasn't enough that was real. You're like, well, maybe it should have just been an animated film. And then there was some stuff that was not the best CG of 2008 and was very Spy Kids. And it hurt me to look at it and think that this was okay, because, oh boy, was there a lot of shots of just bulbous screens that were triggering that Spy Kids 3D look that I absolutely abhor with every fiber of my being. And then there were some amazing shots, anything race related, anything where you're seeing the cars just kind of go. I was generally on board with how all of that looked, barring some other things. But I do agree. It's like when I'm straining my eyes to, I guess, follow the thread of where they're trying to make us look, right? Like, I can't take it all in. There's actively too much that's being provided to my eyeballs, and it's sensory overload.
You could absolutely tell me that this movie was directed by Robert Rodriguez, and I would be like, it is. Because
Co-directed.
yeah, it absolutely does have just like too much information going on, and too much information that's hard to process in the way that, because there's no familiarity of reality, it's like, oh, hold on, I'm trying to translate one thing into another.
Yes, as it's fading, as it's wiping to something else already.
Yeah, where like when you have, Polar Express, yeah, you have like the hard to accept children's faces and eyeballs and stuff.
Soulless children.
But they leaned enough into it of like, hey, this is set into an entirely animated movie. And so like my brain can process like, all right, animated movie. But this was like, all right, there's these animated concepts and then people on these green screens. And then there's also the people themselves. And then, yeah, so it's just a lot going on.
A lot going on. I think the things that stood out to me immediately were how pop filter the colors were. The sky is an unnatural blue. It's an idyllic blue though. It's like I would want to live in a world where the sky looks like this. It's the bluest blue. It's the truest colors of any, like the sky is the darkest night. The moon is the most moon-colored moon I've ever seen in a film ever. And it's this warped reality of every frame a painting, trying to be this ultra stylized look that works 50 to 60% of the time in this film. And the other times you're like, okay, yeah, there's a lot going on here, folks. I need to dial back something. Make something real. Give me something to pay attention to. And then you're like, okay, there's a racer. I have a face. I can look in their eyes and I can read their emotions. And everything else kind of has to fade away. And possibly it's to its benefit where being disoriented in this film, though, I think is a detriment and is not good.
Yeah. And I also, one of the things I felt with like the stylized, because I like when a movie has style. I like when a movie is like, hey, here's my style. I'm sticking to it. And, this one has a unique style that like a lot of other movies don't. And it made it its own unique thing. But there were certain things where like, you had a shot where they're inside his office, right? And everything outside is super bright and colorful. Everything inside is super bright and colorful. And it's like, all right, where does the inside stop and where does the outside start? And not only that, but like you're looking at the characters and it's like, it's almost like the sound stage that they were shooting on was 360-degree lit because there was just no shadows.
Yeah,
everything has light coming from every angle, even though there's light coming from outside. And it was just like, that's in itself not how reality works, where, even if you're watching or another animated movie, there's lighting that provides angles and shadows that help make things easier to recognize as real.
Yeah, I think what's funny too is there's the polar opposite of the Wachowskis knowing very well how to light scenes and doing complete shadow, complete silhouetted sort of conversations to emphasize these type of points throughout the film. And I mean, it's like their filmmaking style 101 is just like having moody lighting, and they pull it off really well. And then there are those scenes where you're like, not only is the lighting weird, they'll do like a side profile shot and the characters almost blend into the background because they're such a poppy color. And then the background is also like a very bright purple, but also not detailed enough to sort of give it this depth that I was trying to, I guess, feel. That's the thing. I was trying to feel that we were in a real place, and I don't think you're ever supposed to feel like any of this is in any way real, except emotionally. You're just supposed to get the vibe from what they say and the actions that they portray, but the environments are completely supposed to just be these like backdrops to essentially like a tone poem to like to the higher concept of anime, right?
Yeah. And, is when they're kind of in the middle of the movie and they all step out of their cars and they're doing that deal in the mountain. And it's like, all right, they're in this natural environment,
Right.
but you can easily tell that, like, because of the way everything's lit and the way everything is like definitely CG, that they are just on a soundstage. And yeah, you have people who have specific colors. Trixie is pink, Speed is blue, Racer X is black, Dad is orange, but like they all blend into everything else because everything is just as bright as them.
Yeah. I think there was also a thing in that scene where like the ground, they were basically in a mountain range. And for some reason where they were was sort of just a like barren wasteland rock formation.
Yeah.
That is like very anime. That is where you would have a big battle with the speed lines and everything. And they did do that, but it was also, yes, you're supposed to be outside, and because the sky is that blue, therefore the lighting is this fluorescent, like fakeness to it. I think that's what it ends up being, is when something is lit not by sunlight, you're like, well, there we go. They're inside. And there was no sun, I guess. There's maybe like the sunrise on the Christo race, but besides that, you're like, there just is no sun in this world. It's just so brightly lit by another stellar body out there that doesn't act like our sun.
Near the beginning that we were commenting on with him driving along with his brother in the car, and they were outside again. The sun wasn't right, but there was something shining through leaves that was reflecting on the back of their car.
Yeah.
And so it was like, oh, okay, like I like the shadowing there. And so sometimes they follow the rule of like something is creating shadows. Other times it was just like, we just the sun's super duper bright, guys.
You know how anime sun be?
Yeah.
It's like they lived on Tatooine. They just sort of used whatever source of light they wanted sometimes. But that is the thing. It's not whatever. They followed the rules of what you would expect a sun to light. But then there were internal shots, there was stuff going on outside, and you're like, that's just not how any of this would look, stylized or not. It just felt so bad. Like it felt like I was like, bleh. I look at a shot, I go, it's art, but it hurts my eyes.
Yeah. And anytime that it was too bright, yeah, we were definitely having those reactions of just like, oh, this is hard to look at.
Yeah.
But there is the opposite of that, where there were the night shots where Either Speed is racing around the track at night and it's like
Ooh.
lit by the stadium lights, or something else happening tonight. We just watched a movie. I can't even pull another thing that happened at night.
When they're like getting hot and heavy in his car.
That one actually, yeah, that did look good. Or the
That's
one
what I'm
where
saying.
they were sitting in the car in that pod and it's raining out, and so you had the rain on the window.
Yeah, that was really good.
Yeah. And so like
They nailed those. I think the darker aspects of this film worked the best for me. I was sold on anything where you're given a darkened room or just a place with no light, and then I'm like, oh, finally I can focus on the one thing, like one guy. Just give me one.
Yeah, and I think that's possibly also a good like example of what a racer does. Like, a racer is on the track and they're not focused on like the entire crowd or everything that's going on with like everything beyond the crowd. It's like, hey, you are in the track and you're focusing on you and the other racers. And so I think when the movie did that and it was like, hey, here's what you're focusing on, it's the track, watch these cool cars do these cool moves, and you're like, oh, okay, cool, that worked really well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's even something to a way to watch this film would be just to try and like watch one racer. like just try, because to me it was impossible. I was fully engrossed in this sort of like, well, every shot seems to be a feast of something, so let me see what I can get out of it this time. And it's like, how many times do I have to watch this film to just like sort of get everything? Because there were even those sweeping shots, I think, when they're being flown in the first time to the big company. There's all these references in all these building styles and billboards and all this stuff, and I got like one, and I was like, there's also like a building that just sort of looks like a chicken, and I don't think that's a reference to anything, but it's funny. And then there was just, I'm like, do I have to go frame by frame to just sort of take it all in? Because I actively cannot process everything that's going on right now.
Yeah, I think if that same scene had been shot at night, it probably would have worked a little bit better, because it would have helped to focus on the buildings rather than like, hey, you got the buildings, you got a street down there, you got this, you got that, you got this, you got that. And like, if they had just focused on like, because like we were looking at it, we were like, hey, like a cool cyberpunk city, I like this, but like,
yeah,
there was just so much visual information going on where like you see the building in the foreground, but you also see the building beyond that and the building beyond that, and then the building that's 8 blocks
they're all
away.
Crystal clear.
Yeah, there was no depth of field, and so you're just like, whoa, there is too much going on.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because speaking of like cyberpunk or like Blade Runner comes to mind in terms of not 2049. I think 2049 does a really good job of color grading that type of, it gives the sense of scale. You get those big sweeping shots of sort of the city or the outer like areas. But the original Blade Runner is, I think, the template to how, if you want to do a big CG city, it's got to be nighttime, folks. And it's fine if you do want to do it in the daytime to show like, look, this isn't a depressing post-apocalyptic, like for some reason the future here is great and we just sort of love cars. It's the whole thing we do. And I think that's sort of like the ideal of an anime, right? Is I don't even know if it ever would rain in an actual episode of Speed Racer. That's not allowed in his perfect town. But yeah, because it was so bright, it was so full, jam-packed of detail and some not so good, like how many modeled specific things were there, it ended up not mattering because there was just too much.
And I think to go with that, right, like if we're talking about Blade Runner, like there are, and now this is because I've seen that movie 800 times, so this is not entirely fair, but like I can tell you like, hey, the Tyrell Corporation is in that cool pyramid, or like you have that one shot with the billboard with the lady who's selling the Coca-Cola. Like there are specific key points that like I remember.
Draw your eye.
And now I remember they flew to a building. I cannot tell you what that building looks like that they flew into.
No, absolutely not. And it is true. We just watched it and are big time Blade Runner fans. But yes, it didn't have a distinct enough. It blended in to the background.
Yeah.
I remember the plane was fucking ugly as hell.
Yeah,
It had
I hated
so
it.
much brushed metal texture and like folding wingtips and stuff. And I remember a lot of detail about it, but like, God, it's one of the worst looking things I've ever seen.
Yeah. And again, and I'm going to feel like a hypocrite because I said that this movie had a very unique art style and like style to it. But I'm going to say that the art style of like the city and that airplane, all very Spy Kids.
Yes, the plane especially, very Spy Kids. I would expect a little child to pop out of there at any moment and just sort of do some spy stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a Spy Kids movie happening in the city in the background. You don't really know.
Are they in the same universe?
It could be.
Yeah.
It could be the full-on... This is what we were looking for the whole time. The Spy Kids Speed Racer crossover.
I think the other shot, too, that just, like, sticks in my mind of just, like, it was funny at first and then went on too long because it was hard to process was when they're driving in their little golf cart at what's his name's corporation, purple guy, bad guy.
Oh yeah, like the long hallway type thing.
And then you have everybody on the segways who they're just like zipping and zooming and zipping and zooming.
Yeah, it makes a fun noise. Whew.
Yeah. And like the first time you see everybody on the segways and they're going impossibly fast on them, you're like, oh, okay, that's funny. But then like you're trying to watch the action of what's happening as they're talking in the golf cart, but your eye is just still following everybody on the segways. And you're like, it shouldn't be distracting. It helped to, create flow to the scene, but it was also too distracting where I'm like, hey, where's that guy going?
Well, what was so funny is they made them all so interesting by making them have different like hard hat colors.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, the Skittles hard hat colors. Where's those green Skittles going? And the motion of all of those Segway riders felt wrong.
Yes.
It felt like they were a JPEG, like slowly being like moved in front of the frame in some way. And because it's another thing where it was like this processing of, which is weird because the whole film is about this racing and speed and motion, momentum, all of these things. And I think they nail it during the races. But when it is this like kart plus Segway situation, somehow all of the momentum and speed and velocity feels wrong.
Yeah.
And just like the movement feels faked beyond the faking of jumping. Like there's impossible things happening during the races, and I'm fine with that. But somehow they mess up people on segways going real fast, and it just looks goofy.
Yeah. And there were times where I felt you would see one person directly from the side, but in the same way that you should have the same perspective, you see a guy where like you can see both the tires of his Segway and he's just kind of like skirting sideways.
Yeah.
And yeah, the perspective on each like person just didn't look right.
Look, if they were all doing cool tricks and stuff and shooting each other in the thing, then I'd be totally fine with it. But because they were just supposedly going somewhere in one direction, it shouldn't have distracted me as much as it did.
Yeah. Or you could also like have had the last shot at the Grand Prix where all the racers are lined up and one guy on the Segway who's also competing and going just as fast. And I'd be like, yeah, that looks about right.
Yeah, you it gives the X-ray of his sort of setup, and he's got like a superconductor thing too, and everyone's like, "Oh, he's gonna win."
Yeah, I love an adaptation of like anime into a real life, medium. But I almost would have preferred if it was like all of the physics and natural ness of real life happens outside of the track, and then when they're on the track, that's when you have it like shift into like full anime, like physics doesn't exist, you can do this, you can do that, everything's magnificent and crazy.
Yeah, well, I think the thing is there isn't enough that happens off the track that even feels not realistic. Well, like when there's fight scenes, right? it's a classic Wachowski's very well choreographed, like interesting to watch fight scene. And then one anime thing or like gag will happen during the fight scene, or the full scene is a gag. And you're like, well, sure. I don't really know what the rules are of this reality, because it feels like there weren't really gags in the races. The races felt like as soon as you're on the track, you will die. If you won't die. You'll be bubbled safely to whatever. But your car will be irrevocably destroyed if you mess up in some way. And then the fights were like, I don't know, maybe you'll get poisoned by a ninja, or something bad will really happen. And it was just sort of like very tonally different. And that's fine. But yes, I agree. A full 180 shift from like a more believable reality to full buck wild racing would give me whiplash in terms of just mentally trying to process it. But then I would, there's a couple races throughout the film. I would then be like, okay, well, it's not the boring part, but it's not the racing part. And so I think I would have preferred that in some way.
Yeah. And in the same way that, you have that office where the inside's just as hard to tell as the outside, like it would have helped to create a split of like, all right, the boring stuff is happening here, and then you have the exciting stuff which is happening there.
Yes. And that's the thing. I don't want to say it's boring, because there's actively an office scene in a truck with piranhas and all this other stuff. They did, I think, in that scene perfectly meld the racetrack to the talking scene, right? Like a torture type of intrigue of the film. And that worked for me because it felt anime the whole time. And then, but it was at night. So there's the trick. There's the trick.
Yeah.
It needed to be darker. I don't know what else to say about it. It was dark.
It was dark.
So it worked.
And, there was also a couple stylized shots in that where like you have Racer X who's driving backwards and the truck's shooting missiles at him.
Mm-hmm.
And it did this like cool, like orange and black effect.
Yes.
Which
yes.
I really liked. And
the profile of both sort of during the explosion was art.
Yeah.
Full on art.
Yeah. And there were a couple other times like that where like it did like a stylized, not like filter over the whole shot, but like it was, some kind of cool action was happening, which was leading what was happening with the color gradient on screen. And I really liked that. And I kind of wish that we had gotten more of that both in the races or in the fight stuff.
Yeah. When it happens, it's great. And yes, it was a little underused to some degree because it was so perfectly done that probably they were like, yeah, we can't do this too much. And I'm like, probably could have done it a couple more times.
Yeah.
Because it was like, it really impacted those explosions, made them pop in that very, very satisfying way. It perfectly silhouetted sort of what was going on. In that one, you have like the truck silhouette and the Racer X car silhouette, and you're like, I know exactly what's going on, and it's perfectly framed in this way that is very pleasing. And it was, again, a distillation of information where you're given two things, and that's all you need to know. And you're like, perfect. I love it. Thank you so much. And it almost did change the style because of how flat it turned the colors. It was essentially, like you have orange and black and then a lot of detail, but it does fade into this sort of very, not monotone in terms of boring, but like few color, like two-tone type situation that is very easy to process and pleasing and instantly memorable.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what else is instantly memorable?
The way that we're going to speed off to an ad.
Oh! Trixie. We're back. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So what else worked or didn't work for this movie for you, Jimmy?
I think we both really enjoyed whenever they went fully sort of into the reaction shot style that I don't know if Speed Racer pioneered it, but they definitely I mean that is the staying power of a reaction shot in anime is eternal.
Yeah.
And Speed Racer is definitely known to a comical degree of just holding on someone with their mouth open like and when the movie did it, it worked really well. And there were some moments where I would have wanted it more, but when they did do it, you're like, yeah, give me some of that good reaction.
Yeah. What definitely started as a way for animators to draw less frames in a cartoon and is fucking genius to like make your whole production cheaper. Turned out to just be a great bit that just recurred and then they brought into this movie. And I could be wrong, but I think at least most of the ones I remember happened during the races. Anything happened
Yeah.
during a race and it would have a reaction of oh and like beautiful, loved it, wanted more of it. I wanted it like, Mama was making the peanut butter and jelly, and then you had somebody else who was just like, oh.
Is that chunky?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's like,
Yeah.
it's creamy, and then
oh. Yeah. Well, that's funny because it's like there's so much restraint to not do it. Where we're like, oh, it should have been in there.
Yeah.
And then they're like, we can't. They're like, we can't do it. It has to be during the race. And you're like, oh, Wachowskis, how could you take that joy from us? But yeah.
They did show a lot of restraint with again, those color gradient shots, the reaction shots. Like, good on them for being like, hey, we have this great thing. We're gonna give you some of it, but not too much. And dear God, I wish they had just done that with the kid character in this movie.
Oh, we left him in a trunk somewhere. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
The monkey Chim Chim's here though.
Dude, I loved Chim Chim. Like, give me more Chim Chim. But that kid character,
Spritle, man.
I know. In the way that he like was used to carry on different narratives in the movie and also like set up things for like the last race.
Full on set up the like cheating technology thing.
There were definitely times where I was wondering if the movie was Speed Racer or Spritle Racer because it focused on him so much.
It started as a Speed Racer film and then it ended up being a Spritle Racer film. Okay, because there was a momentum to the film, and then they would cut back to Spritle and Chim Chim like chilling outside, trying to watch the race, and I'm like, I'm almost just wishing that he was in the trunk. Or in the helicopter or something, like not as disconnected as they were. Well, I guess they do put him in the helicopter in the last one. But yes, when there was such a tonal disconnect to this child character that already is annoying in the show. It's like this is the annoying character that Speed actively like hates in the show. Is like, you're my brother and I love you, but oh God, you're so annoying and you don't help me enough to warrant how annoying you are. And it's the same thing in the film where you're like, Spritle, why did you eat the candy?
Yeah.
What was the point of all the candy eating? Did we need it? Did it encourage you to leave the plane in a trench coat?
And go hijack another golf cart and drive around with the monkey like a crazy.
And it's like, yeah, sugar high, I guess, warrants that. But
yeah,
there were like emotional beats in this film that did not feel like a kid's film. And then it goes back to that, like, we're having a goofy time throwing monkey feces. And it's fine because it's actively in the anime, but also it hurt the film.
Yeah. And see, like, I think about what you were saying with like, all right, Speed's in this race and then it like keeps cutting back to Spritle and the monkey doing their thing at the house. which does ultimately lead to the dad finding out that Speed is competing in this race that he's not supposed to be competing in.
Right.
But they could have easily just like cut out the whole Spritle part, had Speed competing in this race, and then the dad shows up and he's like, hey, guess what? I found out that you're, competing in this race. And I would be like, all right, cool.
Yeah, John Goodman's just like, what's up, bitch? I'm fucking here with the family. I have a radio and a TV. I know how to work these things.
Yeah, Spritle doesn't need to, control the narrative, and I would have been fine with that.
Yeah, it actively made it feel more like a Spy Kids movie when Spritle was around.
Yeah, it was almost as if you're watching NASCAR. It's like you have somebody else in the room with you who's trying to watch Spy Kids. And so you're like, stop chasing the movie.
And then they run out onto the NASCAR track and you're like, what is happening? How did they get there?
Yeah.
They were just watching Spy Kids and now they're out on the track. And they got a monkey. Yeah. It was actively the worst character. True to the anime though, they're in there.
Yeah.
You gotta stay true to the anime. You can't do a gritty Speed Racer reboot where he's just killing people with guns all the time, because he only does it a couple times in the show. So
okay, hear me out though. Speed Racer Fury Road.
Hey, George Miller.
Yeah, come on. Dude, I would
maybe that's secretly what Furiosa is like a Furio Speed Racer.
Like, I don't even need the post-apocalyptic. Like, they could create another movie similar to this one, but just more based in reality, and then just more like car collisions, car battle, car action.
I would, yes.
Watch it.
I won't say anything more, but yes, I would.
Yeah,
I would, and somehow the full-on like car plus guitarist fits in Speed Racer somehow.
Yeah,
I don't know how, but they definitely are a concept that would work in my mind, and so it should happen.
Because I think the other thing that was just a little bit too much for me in this movie was the plot. And now, this is not to say it's like a super convoluted plot that I couldn't follow, but what the fuck was going on? No, I'm kidding. No, it was just like, all right.
Let me lay it out for you.
This is a kid's movie. And not only that, it's a movie about racing. But then you have the Royale Corporation who's like, hey, we got this huge conglomerate that fixes everything so we make more money and this and that. And I'm like, all right, cool. But also, like, the movie could just be like, hey, Speed needs to win these races, so we're going to, just start with this race, move to this race, and then go to this race. And I would be like, hey, that's fine. I'm fine with that. I don't need the rest of the story.
I think there is an aspect of him going to the Royal Company building at all possibly being unnecessary, and finding out about the cheating device in a different way, and finding out about the fixing of the races in some other way, and just having that happen not in the infuriatingly like money rules everything and look at the stock numbers, they play in my room all the time because I'm evil, and so I love like I check in all the time and I'm like, oh, the Dow's down today. Hate that. Oh, I like the Dow being up. I don't know. Yeah, like actively hate that, because it does feel shitty to just be like, oh, the capitalism is the enemy. And I'm like, sure. But it's like, I could have just been that and not had to tell you that specifically, because I'm the bad guy and I have to tell Speed all of this stuff so that he has an internal sort of tumultuous time with all this stuff I told him. And you're like, I don't know, he could have a tumultuous time with some other stuff. I don't think you have to really sell him on the whole capitalism bad thing. It just can be.
Yeah, and you have a man with the voice of Tim Curry and the face of Justin McElroy, and
it's so mean.
He looks like Justin McElroy. Come on. But
I feel like he looks like the rat character from the Harry Potter films.
oh, he does. Now that's not to say Justin McElroy looks like that, but
No.
yeah.
I'm not. That's why I'm saying it's mean to Justin McElroy, who is
Oh.
a handsome man.
Hey, this guy was, again, looked like Justin McElroy, so not ugly, but you did have him spending 40 minutes of the, first part of the movie trying to recruit Speed, and
Clearly the evil guy.
then it's just like, I don't need all of that trying to recruit him, finding out that he's the evil corporation, finding out that he's the capitalist money grab guy, when it could literally just be Speed finds out that the Royale Corporation has been cheating through races. By finding that out while he's in races, like, that's all I needed, was just Speed is racing, and then he sees a Royale Corporation do something sketchy that leads him to be like, they're cheating, I don't want to be part of that.
So the thing is, I would have preferred he just be approached by the inspector detector sort of team and then teams up with the Japanese corporation and then learns about it then, like, fully.
Yeah.
Like, not everything. Obviously, he's not getting the full monologue that he got from Tim Curry guy, but there's an aspect of that character being so the pinnacle of this evil, the core of this evil company, and expounding so much exposition in such and not a short amount of time. Like it is like 40 minutes of the film. He's like, but wait, there's one more evil thing I've got to tell you about, and just come back to my building and find out about it in some way. Yeah, there's a way to do it that is more nuanced that I would have preferred, and is less anime in terms of the bad guy expounding his evil plans the whole time. I think the one thing that they did right, which they did right with a lot of how this film was paced, was he's telling Speed, this is how you're going to fail in this and this and this way. And then it shows you it happening. And you're like, is that actually happening? And then it was the future present. Yes, he is getting actively fucked over. And you're like, okay, well, that was cool. I like that he is, like, he's evil. He's following through with his evil plans and actively messing Speed Racer up. So he gets litigious on him. Like, that's where it starts going downhill, is you're like, you're being sued. And it's like, oh, okay, fine. You blew him up. Like, can't you just, like, be done with him there? And it's like, no, you're getting sued, and your IP theft won't go unnoticed and all this stuff. And you're like, okay, well, sure. Yeah. This movie is about racing fast cars, folks. I don't know if we need to get anywhere litigious here.
And then it turns into a courtroom drama.
Just what we love.
I will say, for it slowing down the movie, it did set up, I think, pretty well, Speed having that whole, like, who am I? Why do I race? That I think could have been done, in other ways and still gotten to the same point. But for what it was, it did work really well to have him, question his character throughout the movie, and then through what happens in the end, have him, come out with this satisfactory reaction of like, oh yes, this is why I race. This is who I am. My name is literally Speed Racer. If I got a job at the, Burger King, it would make no sense.
Should call him Burger Flipper.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So that is the thing too, is it's not my favorite way to have it be paced, but the payoff and the questioning of it, the full-on payoff of him having the realization, because of its sort of nebulous, like, the why is such a concept in terms of, like, well, why don't you know? You're literally Speed Racer. Everyone knows that you're Speed Racer. And he's like, well, I don't know that. And you're like, well, you should fucking know, dude.
Yeah.
But yeah, him being faced with that question is laid out in such a simple way, because he is given this evil monologue that says nothing, everything you do does not matter because it's for this other thing that we care about and you don't care about. And you don't even know about it until now. And he's like, oh, well, shit. Damn, I hate that. And you're like, you should. Can we get to where this is fun to watch again? And you're like, okay, we get back into it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is a moment where you're like, oh, this guy sucks. And it's hard to watch.
Yeah. That payoff with that, not final scene, but the scene of him drawing closer to the finish line and, everything's swelling with the music and the visuals, like that was just like super, just like, ooh, it's a spicy pizza pie.
It was the spiciest of meatballs.
Yeah.
Speaking of spicy meatballs, though, what do you think of this spicy meatball of a film?
It was a good movie. I liked the visuals at times. Ultimately, I'm going to say, though, it's a not watch from me. There's just not a lot that I would... Again, it's one of those movies where there's nothing like truly super memorable from that movie that I feel is a cultural touchstone that I feel like somebody should spend 2 hours of their life to sit down and watch to be enriched in some way.
Fair. Valid.
I
like it.
How do you feel about that?
So I'm going to preface my sort of opinion with, I think this is the second time I've seen this movie. It has been a long time, but the most recent sort of people, the things that I hear about this movie are like, it's some people's favorite film for this many reasons. And I never really get a clear reason as to why it is like their favorite or like the perfect film or whatever. And I come back to it now and we've talked about it all this way and you're saying don't watch it. And I am actually the opposite. I think it is a watch for me, not only because of how just absolutely buck wild the visuals are. The actual payoff is so worth it to me that visually and story functionally, how satisfying the ending of the races to me brings a tear to my eye in terms of him, the culmination of him just being dumb the whole film and not knowing what he's doing, even though he's fucking he is the guy. And then finally he figures it out. There's like a bunch of essentially build up to him having this major realization, and then he whips ass down the track. He's actively killing people, and the final there's the one sequence where he just sort of whips through the lights, and it's like water, like oil on water.
Yeah,
like, that visual seals the deal for me. And then the end where it stretches down the checkered sort of entryway after he's exploded, and it's like mid explosion it becomes the finish line that he is born to, is just actively mind-blowingly so good that I do get why people are like, oh, it's my favorite film. And I'm like, this is nowhere near my favorite film ever. But I think if you get the chance to watch this, I think in a theater, this film would blow me away. And I still got chills. It did the thing that I like movies to do where I get chills because of a sequence being so damn good.
Yeah.
So it's a watch.
I think that you have a lot of good points there. And like, I know that we were talking before this that like, yeah, hashtag Freddie Wong always says that like this is his favorite movie because of the way that like the action and the flow of action helped to inspire him and the way that he would do his, rocket jump shorts. And like, I see a lot of that in this movie of like, there were certain shots that like when you watch a rocket jump video, you're like, oh, hey, like there's a similar camera angle there. So like, I do see how a lot of people would like it. I just, I've already said my bit about like, I think the pacing of the film, and again, there was just nothing, even like, again, I feel where you're coming from with that ending. I don't
It
have
just
the
made it
same.
worth it.
Yeah.
It made it worth it for me. And I think that's what's fun too, is we came out of it, with different opinions, and that's totally fine. It's like 2 hours 15 or something, and there's maybe half an hour that sucks. But I think again, if you get to the end of the film and you make me feel that way, then Wachowski's, hats off to you. You did it. You got me to feel that way. And if you like movies that I've told you to watch, then maybe they'll like, we're so early in this thing. I feel like we've agreed, I think on most of the movies that we've watched at this point. I don't think we've had a differing opinion in an episode before. So this is a crisis mode we've
Blah, blah,
entered.
blah, blah. This is
Blah,
it,
blah, blah, blah,
folks.
crisis mode.
We got a first one.
We got a double nothing. It's not double. It's not a double not watch. It's not a double watch. It's one watch, one not watch. And so, yeah, it is sort of a building of the character in terms of, does me wanting to watch this film or want somebody to watch this film mean something in terms of you telling someone not to watch this film? Because I am having Matrix vibes in terms of, we haven't actually done an episode on that, but I think we have a differing opinion on, I don't know. There's three of them. Who could say?
That's very fair. And I think that's also kind of telling that, again, it's the Wachowskis. And like, I didn't think about that until you just mentioned that. That, again, I can recognize that this is a good movie. I just don't want to recommend to people to watch it.
Well, that's what's funny too, because I feel like the Wachowskis are very divisive filmmakers.
Yeah.
And I think is Jupiter Ascending them?
Oh, it might be.
If it is, that movie, I won't even go into it. But regardless, so my whole thing goes within, like, if you do like Wachowski films, if you're interested in how they make films and there is their style fully ingrained in this film, then that feeds into my watch. As I'm like, I don't know, watch all of them. Maybe they're good, maybe they're not, I don't know. This one, I think, good or not, does get my approval in terms of, yes, it made me feel the thing. And when I feel the thing, I like the thing. That's all I can really say.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. And I'm not going to like fight for it. I'm just going to like give my piece and be like, look, I like when a film brings a tear to my eye. Give me the Toy Story 3 where I cry every time.
Yeah.
If you can evoke that type of emotion in 2 hours, then that's pretty impressive.
And, ultimately that's why we are here. And hopefully that's why you, the listeners, are here is, we're not here to say like, oh, hey, we're rating this movie 8 out of 10 for all of these, fundamentals and stuff. It's literally just us giving you, the listener, our opinion on whether we think you should watch it or not. And then hopefully if you, do or don't watch it, you then have your own opinion on whether other people should watch it or whether we're right or wrong. And that's fine, because that's just what opinions are.
It's all subjective, folks. And at the end of the day, yeah, it's like, you don't have to watch it anyways.
Yeah.
It's just what we're telling you right now. But yeah, I think that's going to do it for this episode of Too Much Popcorn. Did you have too much popcorn during this? Did you grab a bit too much?
I forgot my popcorn. Don't tell them. They don't know.
I dropped all mine on the floor. I hope somebody picks it up.
After every time I watch a movie, I just leave all my litter laying around. The attendant hasn't been through my house in years.
Well, yeah, they should feed. That's how I feed all the people who work at the movie theater, right? They eat the ground food.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for enjoying Too Much Popcorn with us. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and check out the film if you want or don't. Aaron tells you not to. I tell you to. It's our first differing opinion, and maybe first of many. Who knows? But until the next time we review a movie, that's going to do it. And if you have the time to review us on wherever you're listening, then throw us a little review or comment or rating or however you kind of do these things nowadays, and let us know what you think of the pod. And have a good one. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, go hop on Apple Pods, read what Seth said. He said some very nice things. We like that. And then, you know what?
Yes.
Just highlight all that, copy, paste, put it in the comments box, and then put that in there. It's not plagiarism. It's just an opinion.
Just sign it as Seth, and then it's identity theft.
Thanks, Seth.
Yes, thank you so much, Seth. That was really nice. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.